Hello and welcome to the big picture. The ongoing visit of Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh to Japan has evoked a lot of interest not only in the two countries but across various other countries in the world. The importance of the visit is underlined by the fact that Dr. Singh himself has, during his interactions and speeches in the last 2 days, mentioned how Japan is at the heart of the Look East policy of India. It also needs to be pointed out that the two countries are natural allies as there are no conflict of strategic interest. And neither is there any negative historical legacies, and the people of the two nations have always enjoyed close and friendly relations. However, the closer the two countries come, the other major power in Asia, China, gets more and more uncomfortable. The challenge, therefore, for India is to balance the relations in such a way that neither China nor Japan feel offended, leading to the ties being affected. Admittedly, it's a challenge for the diplomatic community as well as the government to indulge in this delicate balancing act. Today, we will discuss the future of Indo-Japanese ties in the context of the changing power equations across the world and the need for India to balance its relations with China. To discuss this, I have with me Rajiv Sikri, former ambassador and secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs, R.N. Das, senior fellow, Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, Professor P.R. Deepak of the Center for Chinese and Southeast Asian Studies, JNU, and Sandeep Dikshit, senior assistant editor at The Hindu. Welcome to all of you. Let me go to Mr. Sikri first. Mr. Sikri, do you think that the Prime Minister is going to Japan after 3 years? Is this some kind of a new dawn in the relationships between India and Japan? Do you see it as that?
I think we should remember that for the last few years, we have had an annual dialogue at the level of prime ministers between India and Japan.
Right.
It is just that last year, because of the elections in Japan, the annual meeting could not take place, and therefore it was postponed to now. The Japanese side had wanted it early this year, but it did not suit our prime minister.
Yes.
It's been about 10 years, I think, since India-Japan relations were on the ascendant, and this is therefore a continuation of that trend. But I would agree with you that in the last year or two, the level of interaction has intensified. There is now much greater emphasis on defense and security cooperation.
Right.
And there is a deepening of the economic cooperation, the scientific cooperation. So I think across the board, yes, I would say that definitely there has been an acceleration in India-Japan relations, and this is to the good. You mentioned about the China factor.
Right.
I think India-Japan relations have an importance even without a China factor, because let's not forget that Japan is the third largest economy in the world.
Right.
It's a very important technological player in the world. It has got a lot of surplus investable capital.
Right.
And we need more of that. And when you add to that the China factor, the concerns that both Japan and India have about China, and also the fact that Japan is now withdrawing a little from China on the economic side, and therefore India is a natural partner where it should invest its money.
Right, right.
So these are the synergies that I think are bringing our two countries closer together in the last year or two.
Okay, we will discuss this China factor a little later. Let me come to Mr. Das. Mr. Das, the strategic relations, how important is it for the Indo-Pacific region itself?
Yeah, it is very important. In the context in which the Prime Minister visit is taking place, you see immediately after the Ladakh incursion in the Ladakh, and also after the visit of the Chinese Premier Li to India, the visit is taking place. But look at even the larger picture of the development in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea. So these developments have certain bearing on, partially of course, it's not peripherally has some bearing on this thing, and that is the significance, because basically we are talking about last time when I was attending a lecture by the Deputy Prime Minister of Japan on 4th of May here, he spoke about the maritime democracy, very symbolic. talking about the convergence, the two convergence. One is the democracy and the maritime democracy, a concept which was in fact earlier initiated by the Prime Minister himself when he spoke at the Indian Parliament.
Right.
He spoke about the confluence of the seas.
Right.
So, and
I think today also he has mentioned, yesterday in one of his speeches he has mentioned it.
Yeah. So now you need to, China factor is certainly there, but it's not correct to look at India-Japanese relations in the prism of
through
China.
the prism
only.
of China.
Yeah, not necessarily so. Of course, the recent development has certain added angle to that. But to look at India, it has its own narrative, it has its own resonance, like, two being the democracies and economic factors are also there. The Japan can invest hugely in India's $1 trillion infrastructure development.
investment.
A lot of scope are there.
Yeah, that's right, Professor Deepak. These aspects are there. We should not look at the Indo-Japanese relationship through the prism of China is fine. There are a lot of things which India and Japan can do together. But why is it that there was some kind of a downturn in the relations for some time, and why is it again re-emerging? Don't you think there is a larger angle to this?
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree with my previous colleagues. I would like to quote from the joint statement which was issued by India and China, and
Right.
Article 4 of that joint statement says that both the countries, they will think positive of their relationship with other countries. They will, not think it otherwise.
Right.
So I think, yes, the statement says that, but I think we should also acknowledge the fact that the gravity of the politics, is transferring from Atlantic to Pacific. That is very, very important. I think if we talk about that, China, India, and Japan, three, largest economic entity and also the military, powers of this region. They are not only important for the region, but also they have, global ramification, And from that perspective, of course, I think China is a little wary, it creates consternation, when China, Japan, India, Japan, India, US. India, Japan, they come together. And there are, there are articles, being written in Chinese
Democratic
newspapers.
security diamond. That's what.
Yes, that's what the Premier Shinzo Abe,
Yes.
points to it. That's exactly, which creates apprehensions in China. And also, given the background of China and Japan relationship, China recently they marked the 81st anniversary of Sino-Japanese War, which started in 1931. And a bell in the museum in Shenyang, it was rung 14 times, indicating the 14 years of humiliation, and that is 14% of 100 years of humiliation which China talks about.
Yes.
And I think
They have not forgotten.
They have never forgotten, they have never forgotten. And it is in this context. And moreover, till 2003, China used to be, receiving this official development assistance from Japan. It was the largest country. But now that shift has taken to India. Now India is the largest. And not only this, when there is talks of maritime security between Japan and India, when there is the convergence of ideas on the sea lanes of communication, freedom of navigation, that is certainly creating a lot of problems for the Chinese strategists. But I think here again, when we are talking about Chinese strategic shift in the area, it is rebalancing its strategies. When it is having increasing level of political clout or economic clout, I think we in India also need to reshape our policies in the region. Why? Because I think it is not the benevolent or malevolent nature of relationship between India, China, or China, Japan, or China, US. But I think it is the structure of the global politics that will undermine what kind of relationship the country will have in the future.
Absolutely. Sandeep, let me go to Sandeep. Yeah. Sandeep, the relations between India and Japan, how do you see this in the coming years? Today's in the last 2 days that the Prime Minister has been there in Japan, he's been talking about various issues. It's not just economic cooperation. He's talking of strategic cooperation. He's talking of security issues. He's talking of the way the two peoples can come together on various scientific and other things. You think Japan is going to become one of the most key partners for India in the coming years?
Yeah, Girish.
And one more thing, and how is it? And is that going to be? Is there going to be an axis, because Japan and US being such close partners? This triangle of US, Japan, and China. Sorry, US, Japan, and India. How is it going to affect the other countries in the world?
Well, Girish, you've already said that it's a delicate balancing act. So it's going to be a delicate balancing act all through. But what we notice is Japan has been late, actually, late by 6, 7, 8 years in developing ties with India.
Right.
And the acceleration came in 2010 when China and Japan started scrapping over the islands that are there, Senkaku.
Yes.
And since then, we've seen a blossoming of this relationship. And this visit in particular, I would like to draw your attention to the talk on US-2, an amphibious plane that has both military and civil applications. And this is perhaps the first time that Japan has talked about exporting a defense product to another country ever since it imposed a ban on itself. Second area which we find a major area is rare earth. Indian Rare Earth Limited, in fact, was one of the banned companies. It was on the Japan's export control list. And after China stopped rare earth exports to Japan, they dropped Rare Earth Limited from the export control list. And today Toyota has a joint venture with IREL. And this visit we saw the Prime Minister and the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe agreeing on Department of Atomic Energy and the Japanese entity signing up for a broader framework of cooperation in rare earth. Now, rare earth is a thing that is available in very little quantity in very few countries. So when you start giving your rare earth material to another country, that is a major vote of confidence in that country. And the third thing that we see is space. So space also, there's been talk of joint collaboration. Even the US has spoken of joint collaboration with India. So in that context, yes, I see a Japan, US, India axis in space in some high technology sectors. But the Japanese Prime Minister goes beyond this axis. He talks about a diamond of democracy in the area, which means Australia, Japan, India, and US.
Absolutely.
Now, naturally, India would be wary of getting drawn into something that so obviously challenges China.
Absolutely.
But yes, what has come out from this visit is that India will want to pursue its own national interests and not allow other considerations such as what will X country think or what will Y country think into consideration. So that's a very welcome thing where India is looking for its own needs, own requirements instead of looking over the shoulder. So that is a passing of a phase, in fact, a new beginning that has been made with this visit.
Okay. On that note, we think we need to go into a short break, but we'll come back and discuss many other issues. Sandeep was talking about national interest. The Chinese factor is something which we'll have to keep coming back to. We'll come back very soon. Please keep watching. Welcome back. We are discussing the Indo-Japanese ties in the context of the ongoing visit of Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh to Japan, and how to balance the Indo-Japan ties with China. Mr. Sikri, coming to you, the national interest which Sandeep Dixit was talking about, that's on one side. When we talk of Indo-Japan relationships now, we are also talking of a political relationship with Japan. Both India and Japan are vying for a seat in the Security Council in UN for a long, long time. You think, as the relationships strengthen between these two countries, and with US around, being this axis which Sandeep was talking about, you think that will put enough pressure on the international, on UN and other countries like America to include these two countries also? Is this something which India is looking at when it strengthens its relations with Japan?
Well, our common quest for a permanent seat in the Security Council is there, but I wouldn't really hold my breath on achieving any success in this in the near future. I think there are many hurdles to be crossed, including getting 2/3 of the membership of the General Assembly. Then there is the veto power of the permanent members.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a critical factor. Yes, it is a factor that is bringing us together, but I think the more important is our convergence of strategic and economic interests. And here, certainly China is a factor. I don't think it is coincidental that the Chinese Prime Minister made it a point to visit India before our Prime Minister's visit to Japan. I think the Chinese are quite worried that if a true strategic India-Japan relationship and a trilateral with Australia, quadrilateral with Australia and America emerges, it is very, very disquieting for them. You'd recall that in 2007, when Mr. Abe was the Prime Minister, there was the Quad. But the Chinese objected violently, and then the governments changed in both Australia and Japan, and the idea was dropped. But I think that is just on the back burner. I don't think the idea has gone away, and the fact that Prime Minister Abe is now talking of a diamond of democracies, I think brings out that this is a sword which should be kept dangling, because China must understand that it cannot continue with its bullying behavior, its aggressive behavior towards its neighbors, and the neighbors will do nothing. I think that the neighbors who are coming under Chinese pressure will automatically band together because their interests are common. And the example that comes to mind just now is that of Nazi Germany in the 30s, when Nazi Germany was a source of threat to everyone. And what happened? The rest of the world came together. I think the Chinese ought to realize that this is a nightmare scenario for them. I believe they are realizing it, which is why the Chinese Prime Minister was making these overtures.
But also, Mr. Sikri, today the response from China to the last 2 days visit of the Prime Minister is very interesting. They're calling the Japanese as petty burglars, Japanese politicians as petty burglars, and they're saying that that just there are some people who are trying to create differences between India and China. The reactions are very interesting.
No, but the Chinese themselves are doing it. If the Chinese say that we will do what we want with our relations with Pakistan, and they have given military and nuclear and other assistance to Pakistan and propped it up as a counterweight against India, what is wrong with India working out a strategic relationship with Japan? We must do that.
Okay.
If China can work with India's neighbors in a strategic sense, so should we work with China's neighbors in a strategic sense. And Japan is the largest and the most important of these neighbors. So I see no reason for us to be apologetic about it if the Chinese are reacting negatively.
Okay.
Let them do it.
Okay, Mr. Das, we don't have to bother about how China reacts, but the fact of the matter is that India cannot, afford to antagonize China too much.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. More than anybody, Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh is ever of it, and he has calibrated India's relations with these two countries with a great degree of circumspection from the beginning. I remember, I think, last time when he visited Japan, on one visit he flew from Japan to Beijing. I think that was in 2008 perhaps. He flew from Tokyo to Beijing, and there he said, look, I mean, the Indo-Japanese strategic alliance is not aimed against any country, least of China. And further he added, the trade between India and China.
Do the Chinese believe that?
Yes, in some section, yes. There is, I mean, there are different groups of opinions are there. Like you talked about today's article in the People's Daily. But there are also a group of Chinese intellectuals, like for example, Ma Jialiwan. These are Chinese intellectuals. They think, perhaps the Indo-Japanese or Indo-US relationship, they are not zero-sum game. It's not necessarily so. There are, in fact, that is the reason perhaps they want to befriend India so that India doesn't tilt. But it's no, as Mr. Sikri correctly said, the onus is on China. Why China feels impelled? India feels impelled to have a sort of strategic understanding or convergence.
There is this feeling that China is pushing both Japan and India towards the US.
Yes.
Is that a correct perception?
Yes, it is. Yeah, somewhat it's correct perception. That's correct. Yes.
Okay, Deepak, you think this perception that China is, are the Chinese not aware of this? That by increasing bullying, they are actually creating problems for themselves by pushing India and Japan towards the US and creating this axis?
You're right. I think at one point of time, they realized when I was in Beijing last time, there was, discussion in Chinese academic circle that the assertiveness, so-called assertiveness, of China in the region, it is premature. China should not be doing this because the fallout is very, very clear. The ASEAN, so they have clubbed together. China is saying that, they would like to deal with these countries bilaterally, but they are saying no, as one. And Japan is, finding way out to come closer to India, US, and US is also trying to rope in these countries, trying to make whether it is a defense ties or whether it is stronger economic ties with these countries. Yes, I think there is concern in China, but at the same time, it is their own making, of their own making.
It's of their own making. Sandeep, this is of their own making. One thing. Second, let's get back to the Indo-Japanese relations. Let's keep China aside for a moment. Today, in one of the speeches which Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was making in Japan yesterday, he pointed out to the Japanese that only 4% of the investments which go to Asia comes to India. Isn't this, why is it that Japanese have been hesitant to invest more in India? There have been some iconic projects, as Manmohan Singh has pointed out, like Delhi Metro and this freight corridor and things like that. But why was this hesitation there among the Japanese to invest more in India so far?
Yes, as I've been pointing out, India and Japan have been 8 years late and 9 years late, and more so on Japan's part. One is the frequent change in governments. So you had a government with a different ideological orientation for about 2.5 years, which thought that talking sweetly with China would help build the broken bridges. That didn't happen. So they have now turned over here. Moreover, as Mr. Rajiv Sikri pointed out, Japan has investable surplus. Japan is in a kind of a recessionary phase. Japan has high technology. Manufacturing accounts for only 16% of India's gross domestic product. You can't become a big, powerful nation, aspire to join the United Nations Security Council with that kind of a share in manufacturing. Right. So Japan basically has done all that investment it has done in China. They have trade of about $350 billion, and they now want to turn their eyes towards India. Moreover, in the entire South Asia belt, if you notice, and West Asia also, Japan has no firm and durable friend with whom it can anchor its relationship. So it's looking at India in that way. And similarly, India is now developing interests in that area. It is now planning to cooperate in Yamal Peninsula, for instance, in Russia. There's going to be a mega LNG terminal at Vladivostok. So you got a lot of LNG that is going to come through that route. So it's always good to have a bit of a naval presence there. And so they've been talking about maritime security and open sea lanes of communication and all that. So all these factors are going to play into this. And as Mr. Sikri pointed out, as you have also pointed out, that India has stopped looking over its shoulders to find out which country takes offense, which doesn't. But of course, it doesn't want to be adventurous exactly. To the extent that it doesn't get into this diamond of democracy kind of talk that is going on. Because like it or not, both the number one, Shinzo Abe, Prime Minister of Japan, as well as the number two, Taro Aso, they're both quite bullish on India, a bit anti-China and a little aggressive in their outlook. So it would be well for India to remain balanced. Which it does, and to take care of its interests from both sides, because it has a lot to take from both countries.
Okay. Mr. Sikri, when the Prime Minister is talking of Japan being at the heart of the look-east policy of India, what does he mean, and how does this the approach of India affect the ASEAN nations? Is this something which is harmonious with the Indian interest in the ASEAN region also?
I think this is a very interesting statement that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has made, because till now we have been saying that our relationship with ASEAN is at the heart of our Look East policy.
Right.
Certainly our Look East policy started with ASEAN.
Yes.
And the essential component of that in the early years was the economic component. Now, as Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has pointed out, it is now acquiring an increasing strategic dimension. When that happens, then obviously our our attention shifts to the larger military and players in the region, and Japan is the number one there. So it is natural that Japan will get more importance, because Japan is a much bigger economy, the potential is more. ASEAN remains. It was a very good entry, but I don't think that we can confine our Look East policy to the ASEAN countries. And we have to look at some of the other bigger players, which is why the relationship with Japan and with Korea are now increasingly important in our Look East policy, and the security dimensions are important. Take Japan, for example. We have a 2+2 dialogue with Japan, which is the only country with which the defense and the foreign secretaries sit down with their counterparts from Japan and have a dialogue.
Right.
We have foreign office consultations, we have foreign secretary level dialogues, we have maritime security dialogue, we have cooperation between the navies, there's a trilateral India-Japan-USA dialogue. There's so much that is happening there, and as one of the previous speakers rightly pointed out, for Japan, India is very important, a good friend in a critical region of the Indian Ocean. The sea lines of communication, the energy lines of communication are very important for Japan, and India plays a very important role in guarding that. We had the Alondra Rainbow incident in 1999, where we captured the pirates who had hijacked a Japanese ship. So for the Gulf region, where Japan has huge interest because of energy and otherwise, I think India is a very important, if not a critical interlocutor in Japan's wider policy. They have been a bit slow, as has been pointed out, in reaching out to India, but now I think they have understood that they need to look at India more focused, and we from our part must try and involve not just the big Japanese companies, but also the small and medium sector enterprises who account for a lot of Japanese capital investment overseas.
So, Mr. Sikri, so you don't think that the this look east, rather look further east policy now, looking at Japan and Korea and all, is not going to make the smaller ASEAN countries uncomfortable?
No, I think we are okay in keeping ASEAN there, because don't forget that ASEAN provides a kind of a neutral core around which countries like Japan and China and Australia and India will coalesce. So it's a very good forum, it's a very good place for which to anchor our Look East policy. And certainly there is a need to continue that dimension of the ASEAN relationship. But ASEAN, at the end of the day, has an economy which is, not as big as that of Japan, much smaller than that of Japan.
Yeah.
And therefore, when our interest is to look at investments, you see, we have a lot of trade with ASEAN, but there's not much investment that is coming from
that
there.
side, coming from that
so
side.
when we are looking at investments and technology, then we have to focus on countries like Japan and South Korea.
Okay. On that note, I think we need to end. We have completely run out of time. But on that hopeful note that the relations between Japan and India is increasing and strengthening further, but the need for balancing it so that it doesn't affect our relationship with China also is something which needs to be underlined repeatedly. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Rajiv Sikri, Sandeep Dikshit, Mr. Das and Mr. Aryan Das and Professor Deepak. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture, same time tomorrow.